Hello, I'm Robert, and you're welcome here in my busy little shop. On today's episode of What's on My Workbench, we're going to be making this crossbody bag. And I thought about it afterwards. You could make this bag without the straps on the back and create a handle at the top of it and carry it as a satchel type purse. But this one's going to be a crossbody bag. I made this out of some pre-dyed vegetable tan leather that I bought I don't know where. I've had it for a while. I think I bought it at one of the trade shows. It could have been purchased from Montana Leather, but I think I've had it for a while. So I may have purchased it from a different vendor in Texas about a year and a half ago. And I've been sitting on it waiting to come up with the right project for it. Well, this is what I came up with. And I'm going to let you follow along today. We're going to jump right in. I've already cut the pieces out, and I'm in the process in the video of starting the forming of the pouch itself and this stitch line right here. And I recorded this without any talking, and I'm going to do a voiceover and see how that works. I did a video not long ago that had zero talking in it, and in some ways I thought it kind of like move the project along a little bit faster. So I'm going to try to do a voiceover today, and we're started with this. This is 7.5 inches by 9 inches. It's got a folded seam sewn on the top here. I thought it gave it kind of a nice finish there. It has 2 layers on the inside of the flap and 2 layers to reinforce where this is at, and also to hide the finish of how this clasp mounts on that inside flap there. Like I said, this is 7.5 inches. The body piece of this, it's all one piece all the way around to here, and that is 23 inches. And the 2 reinforcement strips on here are 2.5 inches. So let's jump in on this video and let you follow along as I create this purse. And I'm going to say it. This is a beginner project. I really do believe that with very little experience, and you'll see I use very limited tools, you should be able to make one of these yourself. I do appreciate you taking time to be within the shop. Let's get on the workbench and we'll get started on this project. Thank you. Okay, to get started, I'm using my Weaver 5mm stitching chisels to create the holes here. This top edge, I already did the fold over of it, and I also installed the hardware, and I'll talk a little bit about that here down the road. But there was really just 2 tabs. You push through the leather, it's folded over on the back side, and then I lined that with a 2.5 inch wide piece of leather to create a little stiffness of where that hardware was, and also to cover the back side so it's clean on the inside. And that's the only part of that pouch that is lined, is where that's at. And I'm just completing the saddle stitch here with my John James needles and the Tiger Ritza thread. That color is in beige. And the John James needle is the L3912 COL, and the size is a 1/0. And I'll finish it up with 1 back stitch, and then I'll melt the thread off on the inside using the thread zapper. And then I'm going to work on the gusset next. The gusset was 8 inches by 2.5 inches is the size. And I skived the top edge and folded that over, and I'm just completing the stitching here so that when I sew it in, this is a finished edge as well. So next I'm going to lay out for my stitches along the side here. And what I did was I measured the length, so it's kind of that loop around the gusset. And I stopped about a 1/2 inch short of what I thought I would need to make sure I didn't make extra holes. I didn't want to have to deal with that. So I'm going to go through here and make the holes in the along the sides there for the stitching. I'm now creating the little squares for the back of the purse where I mount the strap. These are 2 inches by 2 inches, and I put a slot in the middle of it. And my intention is that's where the strap is going to go through to connect. And I'm using a 5/8 inch bag punch to create the hole. And I'm just measuring to get them square with each other on the back. If you were off slightly there, I don't know that that would be a big issue, but I put double-sided tape on. And I'm just lining it up here to get it square, and I'll tap it down to set that, and I'll do the next one the same way. My strap, if I didn't say, is 5/8 of an inch wide. And I have a small scrap here that I'm using to create the loop that will hold the hardware that the strap will hook to. And I think this works pretty good. I'll do a English point on both of those, and I'm going to tuck it into that slot and push it down into that point on those squares. You'll see me do that here in just a second. Once that's all layered up, I've got both ends of that little mounting hardware and everything in there. I'll make a hole through the all those layers of leather, and I'm going to use one of the mini Chicago screws I bought from the buckle guy to fasten this to the body of that. Okay, now that I have the English point created on the end of this piece of leather, I'm going to pull out the bone folder and slide this in. And I want to make sure that I get it buried in there far enough that when I put the hole through for the Chicago screw, that I pick up all those layers. So I'm feeling to make sure I've got it in there far enough, and then I'll go ahead and drive the hole in here to install the Chicago screw. And like always, I put a little dab of clear fingernail polish on these screws. The clear fingernail polish, once it's cured, it holds really well. I've had difficulty in removing them. So I think it does a really good job, and it's so much easier than trying to deal with white glue or different things like that to get on the threads, mainly because of the applicator. So, and I install a lot of Chicago screws, and I use very little fingernail polish up. It's also one less thing to knock over. So now I'm creating the holes around that square that I'm going to sew that on with the saddle stitch. And I hit the four corners first, and then I lay out and get my spacing to do the ones along the edge. I call them the field ones. And then when I get ready to sew this, I'm going to start at the top. My idea is it's less visible there, especially when you're wearing the bag, because the strap will be covering that up as it's laying, upward. Just a simple saddle stitch using the same materials I've used before. Now, after I get this finished up, I'm going to go ahead and get ready to glue in the gusset. Now, you'll notice I marked and made the holes in the main body, but not the gusset. It can be really a challenge to get everything lined up on the holes on a gusset. So I went ahead, contact adhesive along the edge, and I just eyeball on there about 3/16 of an inch of contact adhesive, let it set up, and I'll install this first gusset along here. And I'm just going to mash these layers together to make sure that it's bonded really well. I don't want it to move while I'm folding it over and getting it ready to go. And then I'll put a couple of binder clips on here to hold it in place. And now I'm just going to pull up on the leather and just work my way around it. And if anything, I would rather have the gusset overhang slightly the body and trim it back to there. And I do that in a few places. I'm just kind of pinching it together here as I go, so that when I get done, I've got a good clean edge on the gusset on the inside, and I can trim and sand and burnish that edge when I get that all put together. So I'm going to work my way around this edge here, and when I get up here to the top, you'll see that the adhesive, because I did the same with this, I left it back about 1/2 of an inch from where I thought it was going to match up, because I can always add a little bit of adhesive, but it would stain the leather if it was above the gusset. I think that makes sense here. And like I said, I'll get this all mashed together here, and you'll see here, I'll pull this apart and I'll apply a little bit of adhesive here, and and then we can get ready to get this in and sew it. Once I get this completed, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. But before I start to stitch it, I want to set this bag upright and make sure that it doesn't have a twist. If you start or gather more of the gusset in one area than the other, then the bag will not want to sit straight. So this is your time to change it. If you don't like how it's sitting now, you need to pull one side of this apart and redo that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch this. So if you remember, I did not make any holes in the gusset. So this really, I know I get people that ask me why I don't saddle stitch with an awl, but I do some. Once again, I'm not terribly comfortable with my technique and how it looks and all of that, but I do use it. I'm going to be using obviously same thread. I'm going to march up here and mark a couple more spots so I keep my spacing the same. And I'm going to use my C.S. Osborne diamond stitching awl, and it's a fairly inexpensive tool. I've got some others with replaceable blades, but I picked this up at Leatherwork Leather. I'm just backing it up with some leather there so I don't get myself here because there's not a whole lot to hold on to. And I'm going to start off with a couple of back stitches here to tie it in, and then that will allow me to do back stitches on the other side and have it a balanced look. So I'm just going to be quiet here for a few minutes and let you watch my amazing technique. Okay, it's not amazing, but I'm going to go ahead and saddle stitch this along, and like I said, it's really everybody can, you know, make them the way they want to. I will say that trying to create the holes in both those pieces and match them up, it goes fine on the straightaway, but when you get down into the gusset part, you have to either stretch out or shrink up your pattern on the curve. You would have to tighten up the pattern around the gusset if you wanted to create the holes before. And I've done that, but I've had challenges to where then when you get done, the bag doesn't want to stand straight. By gluing the gusset in and then sewing it like I'm doing here, it gives me the opportunity to make sure that it's right and make adjustments if I need to, and then make sure that I'm not fighting the alignment of holes in the gusset area. cinch it up with a couple of back stitches. Actually, there's 3 there, I think. Bring my needles to the inside of the bag, and I will create a square knot on the inside here. Right over left, left over right. And then when I get done, I'll melt that off with my thread zapper and flatten out that melted area. And I don't think there's much of a chance of that coming undone. Now I'll say while we're doing this, you can see the hardware there on the inside. Like I said, there was just 2 metal tabs that you push through the leather, you fold it over a piece of metal on the inside, and then I covered it up with there. And you can see I used some YouTube magic there and have the second side done. Now, I gave you the measurement for the body of the bag. I left that long so that I wasn't worried about where everything lined up on this. I'm just kind of forming as I go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find about 2 inches up from the top of the gusset, and that's where I want to line it up. I'm checking it with the hardware and everything. I think it looks good if the hardware is somewhat hidden on the back. And I'm going to create a doubled over seam here. But the first thing I want to do is mark where that's going to be, make sure that I've got it all squared up. And then this leather, I don't think I said, but it's 6 ounces. And I decided that I needed about 5/8 of an inch between the 2 rows of stitching to create that folded over area at the top. If you went with heavier leather, my guess would be you'd either need to skive that area down or you would need to have a larger fold over area. So all I'm going to do is I'm measuring here to make sure that I have it in there square, because I don't want this pouch pocket, the top of it, not to line up with the sides of the bag. And I'm going to create 2 parallel lines here. I'll use the 5mm Weaver stitching chisels once again. You need to make sure you start on the same side both times when you come across with that, so your holes are lined up again and you're not fighting that. And then once I've created the 2 lines of holes, I'm going to go ahead and get it in the stitching pony. We'll go through the same saddle stitching on there to stitch this over. I'm going to wait and trim the excess of this flap further down the road. And if you're worried about the spacing, then instead of cutting that body 23 inches long, cut it whatever you're comfortable with, 25, 26, 30 inches, you know, to make sure you have enough room there. If you make a bigger gusset, obviously you're going to need a bigger body piece of leather to start with. And I'm starting here with a couple of back stitches again, so that when I finish with back stitches on the other side, that it looks the same visually from side to side. I don't know if most owners of the bag would notice it, but other leather crafters notice, and I guess it comes into pride of work. And I just kind of keep, you know, tightening this down, and it pulls it together. And then I didn't really tap on that. If you wanted to help form that, you could use a mallet and tap that down to form that. But I think it looks pretty good. And if you wanted to make a longer one, you could stiffen that up. I thought about a piece of like weed trimmer, lawn weed trimmer string across the top there. But I was afraid that if you wiggled it back and forth, it might actually work out of one end. I think there's a really good possibility that it might do that. This leather had enough stiffness that it made a nice seam at the top. All right, so this is the part that I think is a little bit challenging, of trying to get this lined up so that you don't end up with it being too short or too long. And what I'm doing is I'm measuring to see how far from that edge that I need to have my hardware so that I can get it cut off there. And it worked out like I had hoped it would. I'm going to cut off 2.5 inches off of here. And I could have used other leather to double this up. But I'm going to cut 2.5 inches off this front edge. And as a result of that, I'll have that leather that I will glue to the inside to stiffen up this flap, because I didn't want the corners, the rounded corners that I'll have on there when I finish, I didn't want them to curl up or roll up. So, and I decided on this clean look not to stitch around here. You could, when you stitch that gusset, you could have continued your stitching all the way up, go all the way around the flap and do that. I've done stitching like that before, but I didn't want that look here. So I've cut off the 2.5 inches. Isn't that a pretty knife? Put in your comments if you know who made that knife. And now I'm gonna mark where that leather is gonna be, and I'm going to then apply contact adhesive. I'm just checking to make sure I got the right thickness of what that hardware is designed to go through, and that hardware is designed for about a 12-ounce piece of leather. Making sure I've got enough room here, make sure I didn't mess it up. What would I do if I cut that too short? What I would probably do would be I'd add to it, and then I would do a binding along that front edge to lengthen that flap and make that longer. So I'm just kind of checking and rechecking to make sure that that looks all fine. Measuring it from each direction. And I'm committed now. So I'm gonna mark it here with a pencil, and I'll apply contact adhesive up to that line on the flap and all of the panel that gets attached to there. And you probably know I use the Weldwood contact adhesive. It's a solvent-based one. And I always apply 2 coats to make sure that I have it well sealed and, you know, plenty of adhesive to make that bond on there. Now you want to make sure you get all of that contact adhesive covered, because it doesn't look very nice to have a dark line across there of adhesive. Even if you had to trim off some of the flap to get it lined up, that would be the best way to do that. And you could have made this panel wider and let it overhang and then trim it to the size of the flap as well. I'm just tapping this down really well to make sure I've got a good bond between those layers so that they don't want to come apart. The next thing is lining up to make this hole for this hardware. And this is the harder part of that hardware. Like I said, the other side was just getting it placed. There's 2 metal tabs that go through, you fold those over, and that's what holds that part on. But this one, I need to make a hole, and if it was a circle, it sure would be a lot easier. But I'm gonna measure, make sure that I know how much extra room I'm dealing with here. Like I said, if I needed to add to it, I would probably just do a binding across there. But I have it right. And so I'm gonna take this hardware apart, and I'm gonna use it to mark where this is gonna go. And you'll see how I do that here. I'll make sure I don't lose these small screws. I'll put them in this plastic bag here. Never find those on the floor, that's for sure. This is kind of one of those defining moments on the bag. If I don't get this placed right, it's not going to work well. Maybe someone's got a better idea on how to do that. This is the part that I really don't like on bag making, is lining up these fasteners. And I suppose I could do a flap that's got a tail on it that you put on to like a buckle further down on the bag. But I thought this was a cool looking piece of hardware, and I'd actually purchased this hardware probably 2 years ago, been waiting for the right moment to use it. So I just pushed on there, got it lined up, pushed on there, and made a little bit of an imprint. I'm gonna make sure I measure to see if it's centered right, because I can always shift it a little bit as I make the holes. And I'm happy with it. So I'm going to take my pencil and kind of highlight that imprint that happened from that metal edge, that raised metal edge there. You could use a pen if you wanted, because you're either going to be removing it or it's going to be hidden behind that metal that makes up that clasp. I'm using a round punch here. If I had one that was slightly bigger, it would have been better. I think this is a 3/8 punch that I purchased from Tandy. It's one of those where you unscrew the front side of it. You can put different size ones on there. That's the largest one that was in the set. And I'm just hitting the ends, the rounded ends of that 4-way clasp now. And then I'll use a knife and clean up and trim that. And then, yeah, let's get that done, then I'll go from there. You gotta be careful not to overcut. I find it easier to cut towards the center, and I'll just nick it on each side. So there's 8 little cuts to get to the center of this. And that knife is very sharp. It's a new acquisition I'm trying to get comfortable using. It's amazing how much different, the feel is when you start changing, your primary tools like that. I'm just checking to see where I need to trim it off a little bit. And then these 2 spots here, they're little circles where the screws go through. And actually what I'm doing now is I'm putting some lead on this edge, and I'm gonna press it onto there to see where I need to trim a little bit, because I need to take a little bit of it off. But there's also 2 little ears there that have holes in it for the screw to go in. And those are 2 additional little rounded areas. So I've got all this marked. Press down on it here and transfer that pencil lead to the other side. And then I'm going to nick off those 2 areas there and clean up this edge here a little bit, taking away any areas that have the pencil lead on there. And I'm trying to keep in mind what is centered the whole time that I'm doing that. Now I'm going to use this small CS Osborne and get those 2 spots where those screws go. So it's kind of like additional little nicks in that design. So just a little bit of a dry fitting here. Take a look at it here, and I'll need to clean up just a couple more areas, but I've got it fitted pretty well. I don't know why they don't design it to make it a little easier there. I suppose for some people this is considered easy, but for me it's the stressful part of the whole project, and maybe I could change the design to where I set that first so I wouldn't have so much time invested. I'm just checking to make sure I've got it square in there. I could probably nick a little bit of leather and rotate it a little bit if it needed to be done, but I think I've got it set in there pretty well. And now it's time to flip it over and put the other piece of hardware on here and dig out those little screws and put it in there. And I didn't on the first go around, but I ended up putting some not contact adhesive, but fingernail polish on those screws, because I thought they may want to back out, and I didn't want that to happen. You could probably, once you get them in there, just dab fingernail polish over the screw, and it would seep in around the head of that and keep it from going anywhere. That would probably work just as well. But I'd have a hard time probably finding those small screws, not them when you lost them, but finding replacements if they came out of there. And here we go with my first fitting, and I think it turned out really pretty well, and everything sits the way that I wanted. I suppose if your flap was off a little bit, you could carefully cut along the edge of the flap and clean that up. But the next thing I need to do is to round my corners, and I'm just going to use my Weaver corner tools. That you don't have to drive them; they're sharp enough. You can just put some pressure on there, and it cuts it right off of there. And then I'm going to set up on the table over here, and I'm using tan coat on this application. Probably should have put the tan coat on before I did that last bit and install that hardware, because I'm going to get it on the hardware, and then I'm going to have to use a rag and clean it off of there. And I'm just going to take my time putting it on there. There's a couple of areas that darkened up. Maybe they had stretch in the leather or whatever, and I was a little bit concerned there. And I've had that in the past where it shows up there, but when it dries it goes away, and it did on this one. So those areas, when it's dry, turned out just fine. Now, a lot of you know I use Resling. If you wanted a bag that had more shine on it, then use the Resling, because it does a good job of putting a shine on there. But I thought this leather had a little bit of a rustic look, and I didn't think that would look right being shiny. And I'm not really so much worried about getting color rub off on a crossbody bag like this. Now, I suppose if it got caught in a rainstorm, maybe you could get some off of it. The other thing is I decided to leave the flesh finish on the inside of the bag completely raw. You could seal that if you wanted using the tan coat, but then you kind of have to burnish that or flatten it because it makes the inside rough. And here I'm using it on the straps, and I sealed it with the straps, and now I have cut the edges, and I'm sanding these, and I'm going to burnish these. And I know you guys don't usually see me use Tokonol. Doesn't mean I don't have it. And that's why I decided to play with some on this edge. And once I get it done sanding, I'm going to go ahead and apply that a little bit. And I do it repeatedly until I got the edge burnished the way I wanted with my slicker there. And I don't know about this brand. Maybe someone else has got one they like. When I see other people using that, it's kind of a creamy white, and this is a translucent product. I believe I bought it at Tandy Leather in one of their stores. And I wish it had a little more umph to it. And a couple times in the past, I know this is way off base, but I actually used some white glue that I reduced like 50-50 with water and used that to seal the edge, and that was on some chrome tan, trying to get a little slicker finish there. But I'm just going to apply this here with my finger and slick that down, and I'll work my way around this. I actually took a couple areas with some really fine sandpaper and slicked it down a little bit more, and just kind of repeated until I got the edge looking the way I wanted it to. I'm actually using some denim here to burnish that just a little bit as well. So I'm going to finish up my shoulder strap here. It's 5/8 of an inch wide. It's the same 6-ounce leather. I've got 52 inches of total leather. I'm going to create a fold over here. This will hook directly to the hardware that's already on the bag. And then on one of these, I'm going to attach more hardware, just like I used on the bag. It's a friction fit 2-loop piece of hardware. And you could put buckles there or however you want to finish that. I don't think we need to get caught up on that, but I just used the friction on that to create that connection. And just like that, we're getting this bag finished up, the same Chicago screws with my magic adhesive here. And we'll put that together, and it's time to clean up the bag and call it quits here. I appreciate you following along. Let me know what you think here. I'm going to wrap up here in just a second, and we'll take a look at this bag and see what we think.